Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Harvard Federal Credit Union Student Loan Repayment webinar. We're delighted that you took a little time to join us today and learn about your student loan options. So today we are in webinar format, and that means that we cannot see you, we can't hear you. If you're attending this and you're worried about background noise or something, don't worry, eat your lunch, do whatever you need to do while you attend the webinar. We do, however, want you to participate in this webinar actively. So please drop your questions into the Q&A feature of Zoom at any point, particularly as the topic is being covered. Our experts would like to answer as many of your questions as we can as we are going through the topics. It is a kind of dense, complicated set of topics, so we want to make sure that we get to as many questions as we can. This presentation is being recorded. It is going to be available on our YouTube channel, and you will get the slides sent to you. So if you would like to just relax, you don't have to write down everything. Basically, you'll be able to rewatch it. You'll be able to look at the slides. So don't worry about that. And we will send you a survey at the end. With that follow-up, we're going to ask you to fill out a survey telling us how we did. So we appreciate your help with that. So now I am delighted to introduce our experts. I'm joined by my colleague, Mel Martinez, who is a loan servicing and support supervisor here at Harvard Federal Credit Union. Mel is primarily here to answer questions. If we get any questions about specifically lending from the credit union and what your options are and that kind of thing, Mel is here and can answer those for us. But the main expert that we brought here and that we're delighted to bring to you is Betsy Mayo. Betsy is the president and founder of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, which is known as TISLA. She's been working in the student loan industry, doing compliance and advocacy work for more than 2 decades. She's helped thousands of borrowers with their student loans, and she also has been the primary negotiator on a lot of federal rulemaking related to student loans, complicated topics like student lending at foreign schools, loan rehabilitation, and borrower defense to repayment. She not only does these kind of help sessions with borrowers and people like us who might have consumer level questions, she also does regulatory training for higher education, all kinds of folks throughout the higher education and lending industries, and both in the United States and internationally. And you may have seen her quoted in the media in places like the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Boston Globe. She was recently featured in Money Magazine as one of the top 50 influential change makers in American finances. So we are delighted to have Betsy join us today. And Betsy, invite you to come on camera and go ahead and share your slide deck.
Oh, thank you for that. Let me get my, as soon as you close out yours, I'll put out mine.
Should be good to go.
Okay. So thank you for that really nice introduction. I briefly turning my camera on so you can see I'm a real person and not AI, but now I'm going to shut my camera off because my face is going to contribute absolutely nothing to this presentation. A couple housekeeping things. So this presentation is a little weird from the way I usually do things. Usually I explain the things and then I talk, if it's relevant, I prognosticate about the future of the things. But based on what's been going on for the past month or so and my interaction with consumers, I suspect quite a few of you are here more to get an update on sort of the chaos that's been going on in the industry. So I'm doing things a little bit backwards. So I'm going to start off with updates on, for example, the SAVE litigation and how it affects income-driven repayment plans. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think could happen, changes to programs such as PSLF and repayment options with the current administration, as well as the budget reconciliation bill that Congress is working on. And then I'm going to go in and explain how to manage your loans and the options that you have available to you. So some of this, again, because it's a little backwards, some of it might be a little confusing. So bear with me. The other thing is I want to reiterate that I do encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A, but I am going to ask you to hold off a bit. And wait until I've covered the topic that your question pertains to. Because if I'm doing my job right, I'm going to answer that question as part of my presentation. So again, ask your questions, but hold off until I've covered the topic that your question pertains to. The last thing I want to mention about Q&A is, remember, this is being recorded and this is a public forum. Please do not put any of your personal information in the Q&A. You don't need any of your friends or neighbors or coworkers or just the general public knowing your business. If you do have a really intricate, detailed question, you are encouraged and welcome to email us through TISLA. My nonprofit was founded to ensure that people have access to free student loan advice, so you will never, ever be charged. So if you go to the contact page on the TISLA website, which I've provided at the end of this presentation, and I think someone will put in the chat, and you go to the contact page, you can ask questions through there. And we answer 95% of our questions within a business day. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's dive right in. So let's talk about the current state of student loans. So as was mentioned in my lovely introduction, I've been working in the student loan industry since the earth cooled. And I have researched higher education policy back to the 70s. And I can say without being over dramatic that I've never seen the chaos in the student loan industry that I see today, and that quite frankly, I've seen over the last few years. I do think that in the end, the dust will settle, and existing borrowers shouldn't be harmed to any long extent other than perhaps their mental health, which I'm not discounting because there is a lot of anxiety right now amongst borrowers with student loans. But if you think things are crazy, things are crazy. I've lived it, and I'm living it now. So one of the things that's causing the chaos is, talk about that old expression, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. One of the things that the Biden administration attempted to do was create a new repayment plan that they called SAVE. And this plan, if it hadn't been challenged, would have done a lot to ameliorate the financial stress for a lot of especially lower income borrowers. The SAVE plan would have significantly lowered the payment for many or most student loan borrowers, and would have provided loan forgiveness after a shorter amount of time than the existing programs have. But unfortunately, 13 attorneys generals filed a lawsuit against the SAVE plan during the Biden administration, saying that he had exceeded his authority beyond what the statute allows for these lower payment options. And unfortunately, that SAVE litigation has not just put people that were on the SAVE plan on hold, but it's had some tentacles that have affected other areas, especially recently. When the SAVE plan was first challenged in court, there was an injunction issued by the court that essentially put everybody that was already on the SAVE plan on hold and in forbearance. But now there was a new injunction that was issued on February 18th that affects the entire regulatory package that SAVE was promulgated under. And that's why we're seeing an effect on all of the income-driven plans right now, not just the SAVE plan. The reason for that is that regulatory package didn't just create SAVE. It did other things. For example, it made it so certain periods of deferment counted towards loan forgiveness for public service loan forgiveness. So now that's paused now as well. It also changed the definition of your family size for all the income-driven plans. And that's why they've had to pause new applications for all the income-driven plans, Save included. And they've also had to pull down the application. So anybody that's been due to recertify their income-driven plan this month or the end of last month or next month is unable to do so. Um, uh, as of last night, the American Federation of Teachers filed a lawsuit against the Department of Education, saying that it was unlawful for them to block those income-driven plans. Personally, I don't think that lawsuit has any legs because the Department of Ed had no choice, for the reasons I just said, to at least to temporarily pause those applications. I do know that for people that are due to recertify their income-driven plan, that the Department of Ed just sent orders to the servicers last night to extend the recertification dates for people that are due in the near future to recertify their income-driven plans. Now, if before that goes into effect, your anniversary date for your income-driven plan comes and goes, you're not going to get kicked out of your plan. What will happen is your payment will increase to the amount that you would have paid if you were on a normal 10-year standard plan. Now, if you can't afford to make that payment, you can call your servicer and ask for forbearance. But I do think that as part of the orders that went out to the servicers last night, they will probably back those off. The other thing that this litigation is potentially affecting is the forgiveness component for the plans called income contingent repayment and pay as you earn. Now, those plans, long-standing, forgive the balance of your loan if you're on for ICR, if you're on ICR for 25 years, and for pay as you earn if you're on pay as you earn, or a combination of those plans for 20 years. And this litigation is called into question, despite the fact, by the way, that ICR has been around since 1994, and no one's ever questioned the forgiveness component before this. The court's questioning whether the Department of Ed has the authority to forgive the loans on ICR and pay as you earn. And I honestly don't know how that's going to shake out. If the court decides that the Department of Ed doesn't have the authority to do that, I don't know if the people already on those plans will be grandfathered in. The courts historically have not been keen on removing benefits already awarded to borrowers, and I don't think they're going to do that now. So I can tell you right now, if you're within the sound of my voice and you've already received forgiveness under ICR or pay, that's, it's not going to be rescinded. I promise you that. But if you're close to forgiveness on those plans, it could be that you're going to be required to switch to income-based repayment, which is the only plan that specifically says in the statute that forgiveness is given after 25 years. So that I'm unsure, how that forgiveness component for ICR and pay is going to shake out, I'm not sure. They are still processing the 25-year forgiveness for people actually on the plan called income-based repayment. They are still processing forgiveness for public service loan forgiveness. If you're on the SAVE plan, your choices are, right now your only choice really is to ride out your forbearance, which you're going to be in forbearance until at least this fall. But once they reopen the income-driven plans, which I expect they will do in the next 2 or 3 months, you also have the option to change to a different income-driven repayment plan at that point. There was some brief messaging that consolidations weren't being processed, but they actually are. But if you're looking to consolidate, you have to use a paper application because they had to take down the online consolidation application because it was tethered to the income-driven plan application. So until they're able to untether the electronic application from or update the income-driven plan application to reflect the injunction, the only way you can apply for consolidation of a federal student loan is through a paper application. So I just threw a lot at you. And if you're not familiar with some of these income-driven plans, that might have been really confusing. I will be explaining the income-driven plans in a few minutes, but I am going to take a breath and see if there's any questions that came in specifically related to the SAVE litigation that might be, this might be a good time for me to answer.
You're good to keep going, Betsy. No questions in the Q&A.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's talk about the reduction in force. As you're probably aware, last week, last Tuesday, there was they issued layoff orders to about half of Department of Education staff. As far as the day-to-day servicing of your loans, I do not foresee this causing a lot of changes. First of all, to be clear, there is going to be no changes to the terms and conditions of your loans. Those are in statute, they're in regulation, they're in your promissory note. The reduction in force is not going to adjust the terms and conditions of your loans. If the Department of Ed were to go away altogether, which, even though, by the way, I think there's an executive order coming on that as well, I first of all, I actually don't think that there will ultimately be a complete I don't think they'll completely be able to get rid of the Department of Ed because they would need Congress to act to do that. But if they did, the loans would just be overseen by a different agency, most likely the Treasury Department. And again, the terms and conditions of the loans wouldn't change. Your interest rate wouldn't change. The availability of repayment plans wouldn't change because all of that stuff is in federal law and all of it in regulation and in your promissory note. But what is going to be affected by this reduction in force, what they got rid of, I was able to see before it got locked up, a list of all the people that were affected. And then I think Politico or the Washington Post put out sort of the new org chart. And it's kind of ironic because the whole purpose behind this RIF was supposedly to get rid of fraud and abuse. But if you look at who they got rid of, it was mostly the people that do oversight of schools, people that do oversight of the loan servicers, what I like to call the helpers, the people that resolve errors on borrowers' accounts. They completely stripped, except for I think one person, the ombudsman unit at the Department of Education. So I fully expect them to take down the complaint portal at the ombudsman unit in the near future if they haven't already. So it's kind of ironic to me. Oh, and then the teams that do audits of schools and the teams that do audits of servicers, they get rid of 80% of those people. So it's like kind of ironic to me that the idea was to get rid of fraud and abuse and waste, but they got rid of all the people that sort of prevent that from happening. So my fear for borrowers in this is not for the day-to-day servicing and not for access to federal loan benefits. It's being able to get things resolved when something goes south. And when you have 44 million student loan accounts, there's going to be errors that are made. Even in the best of times, that mistakes happened, and there were places that people could go. They could go to the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. They could go to the ombudsman. They could go to organizations like mine, and we had our special contacts with the servicer oversight groups to get them fixed. Now, really, the only places people are going to have to go, I mean, you go to your servicer first, and most errors can get resolved that way. But otherwise, your only place you can go is either your attorney general's office. And here in Massachusetts, we're lucky enough to have a student loan ombudsman unit within the attorney general's office. But only 13 states are lucky enough to have places like that, or your member of Congress. So if there is something wrong with your account, I can't believe I'm saying that, but I'm encouraging you to write your member of Congress. They're the only ones that can potentially get it fixed right now. And B, it will shine a light on the fact that we really need more people to be helping borrowers in these situations, not less. The other group that was really affected by this RIF was the technology group. And since then, I have seen some glitches in the studentaid.gov website. And unfortunately, until they figure out who's doing who now, I suspect we might see some more glitches in the studentaid.gov website. I wouldn't lose sleep over that because your live data is actually kept by the servicer. The data on the studentaid.gov website is not live, so I wouldn't necessarily stress out too much about there being glitches in that website right now. But I am concerned about there being clear guidance available to borrowers on that website because that's a really important tool for people to know how to manage their loans. The last thing I want to cover about recent events with this administration is for those of you pursuing public service loan forgiveness, there was an executive order that on its face looked a little scary for PSLF that was issued by the Trump administration. I think it was 2 Fridays ago. And the short answer is don't worry about it right now. It has zero immediate effect on public service loan forgiveness. What the executive order said is it tasked the Department of Ed secretary and the Treasury secretary to go through a process called negotiated rulemaking, which, by the way, takes a year or two to go through, and change the regulations to make it that anybody who works for a 501c3 nonprofit that is deemed to do work that is considered illegal, such as related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or working with non-citizens, for example, that those borrowers be excluded from PSLF. Now, listen, I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV. I can tell you from the statute for PSLF, they can't do that, at least under Department of Education regulations. Regulations and executive orders can't do anything that violate federal law. And there's no wiggle room under PSLF statute to exclude people that work for a 501c3. Now, I'm not as familiar with IRS statute, so it's possible that the IRS could change regulations to exclude those particular 501c3s as a whole from PSLF, but I'm not sure that they can even do that. And I can tell you this, the second they try to do it, there will be a lawsuit, and I actually fully expect those lawsuits to lose. So if you're pursuing PSLF right now, and you're worried about that executive order, that should not be something that's taking up rent space in your head at this particular moment. What I am watching is budget reconciliation. And I fully expect that there will be significant changes to student loans, mostly for student loans made on or after the date of enactment of any such reconciliation bill. And it's still early days yet. We're still in the process of negotiation where they sort of throw everything at the wall to see that will stick. We're also at the process of negotiation where some will offer some really outrageous proposals that they know there's no way will ever pass. But it's a negotiation tactic, right? You offer the really high price that the customer is never going to accept, and you negotiate down hoping that they will accept the price or the policy proposal that you're really hoping to get. Now, what I think is a blueprint for the proposals that might have some legs is the CCRA of 2024 that was offered by Congresswoman Virginia Foxx back in January of 2024. Those seem to be the proposals that I think might have some real legs. So those are the ones that I'm really watching and sort of shining a light on for as far as people that are trying to sort of plan for the potential future. Some of the things that I'm concerned about is the elimination of all the higher education and student loan related tax credits. That's something that would affect existing borrowers. That includes the lifetime learning credit, the student loan interest deduction, the American Opportunity Credit. If I was a betting woman, I would say there's a 50 to 70% chance that some or all of those tax credits go away as a sort of a savings scheme. I also think that there's a real chance that they're going to eliminate graduate and Parent Plus loans, or at least put a cap on the borrowing limits for those programs. This all falls under a general theme, and this is one of the few things that both sides of the aisle agree on, actually, is that there is an issue, that they need to do something to address the cost of higher education. We talk about the student loan debt crisis all the time, and that's a real thing, but the fact of the matter is that's a symptom of the problem. The real problem is the cost of higher ed. So there's a whole slew of proposals in the CCRA that look to address the cost of education, which hopefully will trickle down into ameliorating at least some or minimizing some of the student debt crisis in the future. It doesn't do anything for existing loans, but hopefully prevents high borrowing in the future. So if they do eliminate, and so one of the tactics here is if they if they turn off the spigot or reduce the spigot of how much federal student loan debt people can borrow, hypothetically, it'll force the schools to reduce their tuition costs. So the way this proposal stands at the moment is they would get rid of graduate and Parent Plus borrowing altogether. It would start winding down this year or next year and be completely gone within 3 years. So anyone currently in school would still be able to borrow those loans, at least for the next 3 years. So hypothetically, it would give people time to finish their degree programs before it was gone altogether. The idea is if people still needed funding beyond the limits, which for undergrads, the limit would be around 50,000. For graduates, it would be 100,000. And for people pursuing professional degrees, like to become a doctor, for example, it would be 150,000. And if people needed funding beyond that, they would go to the private student loan market. The total aggregate anyone would ever be allowed to have would be $200,000. So that again is something I'm watching. Again, if this were to pass, we don't expect to see budget reconciliation till the fall. But if it were to pass exactly the way it's written right now, you'd still have about 3 years to be able to take out graduate and Parent Plus loans without a limit before that funding was gone. Some other changes is that are some other proposals I'm watching is schools currently aren't allowed to restrict borrowing, even if they think someone's over borrowing compared to the return on investment expectation of their degree program. But there is a proposal to allow schools to do that, not on a case-by-case basis, but on sort of a broad basis. I do think that will go through. It's something people have been asking for a long time. They are also talking about reducing the number of lower payment options available to new loans. I can't emphasize that enough, to 2. So right now, as you'll see in a few minutes, there's tons of different lower payment options, and a lot of them are exactly the same except where they're different. And that actually causes a lot of confusion. So the proposal in the CCRA would reduce for new loans, they'd only either be able to get a 10-year standard plan or a single income-driven repayment plan. And that income-driven repayment plan, the monthly payment amount would be similar to some of the plans that we see now, specifically what we call pay-as-you-earn or new IBR. The payment amount would be about the same. But the forgiveness component, you'd only get forgiveness once you'd paid back the equivalent of what you would have paid under a 10-year standard plan, including interest. So for someone with high student loan debt who only ever had a low income, they could have that student loan debt hanging over their head for the rest of their lives. But for those who needed a lower payment, at least for a little while, but eventually paid back what they would have paid under the 10-year standard plan, whether it took them 10 years to do it or 50 years to do it, they could count on that remaining balance to be forgiven. So the good news there is that you never pay back more than what you would have paid under a 10-year standard, which is one of the criticisms of some of the existing plans. But on the flip side, you may never have this monkey off your back. So I'm watching that proposal very closely as well. All right, so with all that prognostication, before I get into how to manage your loans today, and the plans that exist and what I expect will continue to exist for existing loans, let me check in with my Q&A team.
Okay, so we do have one question, and it comes from Anonymous. Is there any chance that the months in save forbearance may count towards the 120 required payments?
So right now, there's a concept called buyback, where once you've reached your 120 certified months, you can go back and request to buy back the save forbearance months. I don't know what calculation they're going to use for that, because save is sunk, just a matter of whether it's the courts that bury it or Congress that buries it. But we don't know if they'll use the save calculation or the next lowest income driven plan or something else. There is no chance that they will count outside of that buyback scenario. I shouldn't say no. Nothing's impossible, but I would say there's an incredibly low chance that they will end up switching gears on that. They just can't. By my read, they can't do that under regulation.
And that's it. Thank you, Betsy.
Yep. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, under federal student loans, actually, let me back up a little bit. There's multiple types of student loans. There's federal student loans. In fact, within the federal student loans, there's multiple federal student loan programs. There's the direct loan program. If you took out loans prior to 2010, you might have what we call Federal Family Education Loan Program loans, or FEL. There's Perkins loans. There's loans for nursing school, specific to nursing school. There's other federal loan programs. There's also private loans and state loans. If you're not sure what kind of loans you have, the first place to go is studentaid.gov, and hopefully we'll put that website up in the chat, and I also have it on the resources page at the end of this presentation. That if it's there, it's a federal student loan, and that's going to have all your federal student loans. If it's the other place I recommend you check is your credit report. Now, your federal student loans are almost certainly going to show up on your credit report as well, but any private loans or state loans or loans you may have borrowed directly from your institution are also going to show up on your credit report. So that's, if you don't know what loans you have or you aren't sure, you don't know where they are, those are the two places that you need to go. Most of what I cover for repayment options is gonna surround federal student loans, because those have the most options, and most consumers that have student loans, that it's federal loans that they have, but I will briefly cover private loans at the end. So under federal student loans, we sort of have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the number of lower payment options available to borrowers. And they fall under two buckets. There's the bucket of plans that are based on your income, and there's the bucket of plans where the payment is based on the term of your loan, your balance, and your interest rate. So for the non-income driven plans, your payment amount is based on your loan balance. There's no forgiveness component. Your payment can change if, say, you take a period of deferment, or if your interest rate changes, but otherwise you shouldn't really expect your payment to change in most cases. Every federal student loan, whether it be a FEL loan or a direct loan, whether it's a Stafford loan or a Parent Plus or a Graduate Plus or a consolidation, whether you have a vintage 1982 federal student loan or a bright, shiny new 2025 federal student loan, it's eligible for all the income-driven repayment plans, and you don't need to consolidate to access them. They all have minimum payment amounts. And once you're on them, you can stay on them if you choose to, but you can also switch plans if you choose to, and you're not required to renew the plan on an annual basis. And as a general rule, these plans do not count towards public service loan forgiveness or the other or the forgiveness components that are baked into the income-driven plans. Now, the income-driven plans, those plans are based on income, a tiny bit based on your balance, but more, the balance has more to do with whether you're eligible to get into the plan in the first place. They do currently have a baked-in forgiveness component once you're on the plan for either 20 or 25 years. But as I mentioned before, some of those, with the exception of income-based repayment, the forgiveness component of those plans outside of PSLF is currently at risk because of the SAVE litigation. The payments don't change if your balance changes. They only change if your income changes, and usually you're required to renew your income and renew those plans every 12 months, but things have been really squirrely lately as far as the 12-month renewal goes because of COVID. No one was required to renew during COVID. And then because of this SAVE litigation, some people might see another extension in their IDR recertifications as well. There's no payment minimums for the IDR plans. If your income is really low, specifically below a certain percentage of the poverty level based on your family size, you could have a $0 payment. And $0 payments count towards PSLF forgiveness, assuming you're under one of these plans, and they count towards the income-driven plan forgiveness. let's talk about those individual plans really briefly. For the non-income driven plans, the most common one is the 10-year standard plan. That's a plan you're going to get put in if you don't actively choose another one. It also tends to be the plan, unless you're, say, pursuing forgiveness, that tends to cost you the least amount of money over time. And by the way, that's the key. We get really focused on the word forgiveness, and I get it. I am a sucker for a buy one, get one free at the grocery store too, without actually doing the math. But the name of the game is paying the least amount out of your pocket over time. And for some people, that does mean pursuing a loan forgiveness program. But for other people, it might mean paying your loans off as aggressively as possible. And that strategy can change over time. What you can afford to pay as a recent grad will hopefully be very different from what you can afford to pay 3 years from then or 5 years from then. So I encourage everybody to get in the habit of reevaluating their student loan strategy on an annual basis. And tax time is the best time to do it, in my opinion, because you already sort of have all the things in front of you as far as your budget and so on. So anyway, the 10-year standard plan, you have the same payment amount every month, and it will pay it off within 10 years. Your payment's always going to be at least $50 a month. So let's say if you only ever borrowed $5,000, your payment would be $50 a month, and they're not going to drag it out over the 10 years. You pay it off when the math means that you've paid it off. Extended repayment is just like the 10-year standard, only they extend the term over 25 years. So again, your payment has to be at least $50 a month. And you can only get into extended repayment if the total that you owe in federal student loans is at least 30 grand. It's sort of like consolidation, only you still have separate loans. You don't have one great big fat new loan. And so that can be useful to people who want to pay the minimum on all their loans, but they want to focus on, say, their highest interest loan to pay extra money towards. So extended repayment can be a way to do that. You can't do that if you've consolidated your loans, because now you have one great big fat loan instead of the individual loans. Graduated repayment is sort of self-explanatory. Your payment starts off as interest only for the first 2 or 4 years, and then gradually increases every year. You're still paying the loan off within 10 years, or if you have consolidated loans within 30 years. But again, the payment starts off low, interest only, and then gradually increases over time. And then there's also a plan where they sort of squish graduated and extended together, where they're extending your term to 25 years, but you're starting off on interest only payments for the first 2 or 4 years. And again, all federal student loans, whether it be a Stafford loan, a Parent Plus loan, a Grad Plus loan, a consolidation loan, they're all eligible for these plans. You don't need to consolidate to get into them. Doesn't matter how old the loan is. And to apply, you just get in touch with your loan servicer. It's pretty easy peasy. Where it can get a little more confusing is when we talk about the income-driven plans. And that's because they're all exactly the same except where they're different. And to add insult to injury, 2 of them even have almost the exact same name, but have completely different terms. And I'm looking at you, old IBR and new IBR. So it's understandable why people get confused. It's also understandable why the goal of the current administration, and quite frankly, even the Biden administration and Congress, is to streamline these plans. Who's eligible for the plans depends partly on what loan program you're under, and partly when you took your loans out, and in some cases, your income compared to how much you owe. Now, for those people who have those old FFEL loans, and that you could have FFEL loans if you have any loans prior to July of 2010. The only income-driven repayment plan you can get on is what's called old IBR. People with direct loans are also eligible for that. Now, if you have Parent Plus loans, you're not eligible for any of these except for the one called income contingent. And income contingent is only available for you if you consolidate your Parent Plus loans. Now, there is a super secret, not so secret anymore, loophole that will allow Parent Plus loans access to these other income-driven plans, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But as a general rule, Parent Plus loans aren't eligible for any of the income-driven plans unless they do a single consolidation, at which point they're eligible for income contingent repayment. New IBR is only for direct loans, non-Parent Plus, and only for people who never had a loan prior to July 1st, 2014. Pay as you earn, only for direct loans, not Parent Plus. And it's only for people that never had a loan prior to October of 2007. What all the income-driven plans have in common, a lot of this I've already gone over. Couple things is they do, if you're married and you file your taxes as married, they include both your incomes in the calculation. Some people get their back up with that rule, saying, well, the loans are my responsibility. They're not my spouse's responsibility. That's true. Legally, your spouse isn't liable for those loans. But again, if you file your taxes jointly, the regulations do require that the spouse's income be included in the calculation. Now, if you file your taxes separately, they will only include your income in the calculation. But of course, you lose out on those sweet, sweet marriage tax credits. So that's some math you're going to have to do to see if it's worth doing or not. On the other hand, if both spouses have student loans, they not only count both incomes, but they also count both loan debts. So in that scenario, filing jointly is great because you get those sweet, sweet marriage tax credits. But overall, from the family's perspective, you'll end up with probably the lowest payment between the two of you. The way they calculate all the income-driven plans is that your payment is based on a concept called discretionary income. And discretionary income means something very different than how we mean it usually in day-to-day conversation. To me, discretionary income means the money I have left over after I pay all my bills and, save for retirement and buy groceries. My fun money, so to speak, the money I have to buy clothes and, cat toys or whatever. Discretionary income for the income-driven plans is a very specific calculation. And it starts with your adjusted gross income, your spouse's as well, if there is one and you file jointly. And then for most of the plans, with the exception of income contingent, they subtract 150% of the poverty level based on your family size and state. And to put that in perspective, in Massachusetts, the 2025 poverty level for a family size of 150% of it is $23,475. For a family of 4, it's $48,225. And so that's the jumping off point for your IDR calculation. So for example, for a family size of 4 living in Maryland or Massachusetts, because all the continental United States have the same poverty level, if they had an AGI of 62,000, they'd start off with the 62,000, subtract 150% of the poverty level. This is actually last year's poverty level, but it's pretty close to the same. So 150% of 26.2 would be 39,300. Again, that's last year's poverty level. Might even have been the year before, but again, not much difference. So the jumping off point for your income-driven plan calculation would be almost 23,000. So then they divide that by 12, which gives us 1892. And depending on the plan, they either multiply that by 10% or 15%. So pay as you earn. And new IBR, they use 10%. Old IBR, they use 15%. So your payment under new IBR and pay as you earn would be $189 a month. And your payment under old IBR would be $283 a month. And again, income contingent is less generous, so they use 100% of the poverty level. So your payment would be ICR for most borrowers tends to be the highest IDR plan. The only exception to that is for people whose income is very high compared to what they owe, in which case ICR can actually end up being the lowest income-driven plan. Now, most of these plans, with the exception of income contingent, in order for you to get in them in the first place, you have to have what's called a partial financial hardship. And the easiest way to explain a PFH is that your calculated income-driven plan amount has to be less than what you would have been paying under a 10-year standard plan. In other words, it has to benefit you in order to get into the plan in the first place. Now, what you're in forever unless you actively leave it, even if your income goes way, way up. They just cap it at the 10-year standard amount. But to get in the first place, or if you leave and try to go back, you have to meet this partial financial hardship criteria. So for old IBR, It's 15% of your discretionary income. For new IBR, it's 10, and pay, it's 10%. So to give you an example, using the example I used on the prior slide, family of 4, AGI of 62,000. Let's say the borrower owed 60,000. Their payment under a 10-year standard would be around $720. That, of course, is higher than the $189 for pay as you earn a new IBR, and it's even higher than old IBR's $283. So this borrower would have a partial financial hardship and be able to get into the income-driven plan in the first place. The Parent Plus loophole. Now, listen, I'm going to be the first to say, this is going to seem really confusing as I articulate it. This is practically half a presentation in and of itself. Don't worry about it. If you go to our website, specifically the consolidation page, we have step-by-step instructions on how to do the double consolidation loophole for Parent Plus loans. But just to let you know what it is, there is a loophole. It's a legal loophole. It's written into regulation that if you double consolidate the Parent Plus loans, they can then have access, if they're otherwise eligible, for the lower cost income-driven plans, such as old IBR, new IBR, and pay as you earn, and of course ICR. The way double consolidation works is you're essentially consolidating each one of your Parent Plus loans twice. So let's say you had 4 Parent Plus loans. The first step is you'd consolidate 2 of them in one consolidation and 2 of them in a separate consolidation with a different servicer. So now you have 2 consolidation loans with 2 separate servicers that you did on separate consolidation paper applications. Once those exist, you take a third paper consolidation application, pick a third servicer, and consolidate the 2 together. Now, technically, there's a deadline to get this loophole completed of July 1st, 2025. And I would be really worried about whether you would have time to complete it by July 1st if you were to start today. It's not impossible. So if this is going to help you, I suggest you go for it, because it's not going to hurt you either if you're unable to complete it by July 1st. But the other thing is that one of the benefits of this whole SAVE litigation package being under injunction and maybe going away altogether is that's where the deadline is. So if the whole SAVE package, first of all, that deadline is at least temporarily gone because it's part of that SAVE package. And if the whole package goes away forever, then the deadline is gone forever, or until they create a new deadline in a new regulatory package, which would take a couple of years. So again, if a Parent Plus double consolidation loophole would help you, I would definitely pursue it. Okay, so just to show you how the different plans play out, if you're someone who say owes 95,000, you have an AGI of 30 grand, family size of 2, we're assuming an income growth of around 2.5% a year. Excuse me. Under a consolidation standard plan, your payment would be about $570 a month. You'd pay it off in 30 years. You'd pay back a total of more than double what you took out. Under old IBR, your payment would start at around $52 a month. It would go, again, assuming an income growth of 2.5% a year, it wouldn't get any higher than around a little over $100 a month. And after 25 years, you'd only pay back a total of almost $24,000, and the rest would be forgiven. Income contingent, you'd start off with a payment of around $213. You'd pay back a total of $89,000, and you'd also see forgiveness. I know we only have about 10 minutes left. Before I get into other options other than the payment plans, I do want to see if there's any questions about the payment plans that might be good for the group.
Betsy, we have a question about if we can, the person wants to know, if I consolidate now, is it right that there's a lot of changes in the law and it might not be worth doing? Is it hard to get in touch with anyone who can be helpful?
Well, I'd like to think that we're helpful. And you can always, like I said in the beginning, TISLA always offers free advice. We do it via email. So I encourage you to go to our contact page to email us if you have questions. I also encourage you to go through the consolidation page about double consolidation. Historically, and I don't expect it to change, Congress has never removed a benefit from existing loans, and regulations cannot be changed retroactively. So that's why I say you don't have anything to lose. If double consolidation might help you in the future, especially if you might be retiring at some point in the next years and you might really want access to those lower plans, you have nothing to lose by pursuing this double consolidation.
We also have a question, why wouldn't everyone just do the income contingent payment plans if it's that much savings overall?
Well, because ICR doesn't every borrower is different. ICR is not the most savings for everybody. Um, depending on what you owe and your income, these plans could actually cost you more over time because you're stretching out the amount of time that it would take you to pay versus a 10-year standard. And for other people, income-based repayment might be what saves them the most money. There's one thing I've learned over my 25 plus years doing this, there is no cookie cutter answer. You could have someone that owes the same amount of money and has the same income and has the same family size, and the answer might be very different because their financial goals are different. Or maybe they have high medical debt, or maybe they're saving for a house, or maybe they have a Brady Bunch worth of kids. You just can't, there's no cookie cutter answer.
So that's why I definitely encourage people on this call to be contacting TISLA. The information is in the chat. Is this a good time to ask a question about public service loan forgiveness, or are you going to be covering more about that later?
I am going to cover PSLF at a really high level, so let's hold off on that question.
Okay, we're going to hold on, but we'll try and get to it at the end. Thanks.
Okay. So if you're looking at these payments plans and go, well, none of this works for me, there are things that will postpone payments altogether temporarily called deferments and forbearances. I would argue to use these as a last resort because it's only a temporary fix and there's a limited amount of time that you can get these deferments and forbearances for the most part. Also, interest still accrues for most loans during these, and after deferments, any unpaid interest gets added to your principal, so you get charged interest off of interest. So again, these are only temporary safety nets, so you should only use them as a temporary fix, and they should, if you look at these payment plans and say, I'm not going to be able to afford any of these plans for more than a year, then you might want to look at alternatives other than these deferments and forbearances, such as, and I know this is going to sound like, well, if I could adjust my budget, I would do it, but I hate to say it, adjust the budget and see if you can find some savings somewhere else. Because again, these are only temporary, safety nets. All right, so speaking of public service loan forgiveness, something else that we have a lot of with federal student loans that's unique to the federal student loan programs are forgiveness and discharge programs. The ones that are the most well-known is public service loan forgiveness, which PSLF forgives the interest and principal balance on a direct federal student loan if you've been making eligible payments, which is for the most part payments made under an income-driven plan, while working at least 30 hours a week for either an eligible nonprofit employer or a government employer. There's a big myth that it matters what you do for a living. It doesn't matter at all what you do for a living. It matters entirely who you work for. So for example, Boston Public School System. Sure, the teachers are potentially eligible for PSLF, but so are the cafeteria workers and the groundskeepers and the secretaries and the principal. Because again, it matters who you work for, not what you do for a living. On the flip side, if you're a teacher and you might even teach low-income families, but you work for a for-profit charter school, that's not going to be eligible for PSLF. I do not expect PSLF to change significantly for existing loans. I actually don't even really think it's going to change significantly for new loans. There's actually not a lot of political capital to be gained by doing that. Both sides of the aisle have constituencies that benefit from PSLF, and public service workers attacking them sort of looks like, getting caught on video kicking a puppy in the rain. And I know some of you might be going, but they don't care about that right now. But they kind of, they kind of do, especially members of Congress that need to be reelected in the next congressional primary. And I actually haven't even really seen any proposals with legs. There's this broad, high level, we should look at PSLF for budget reconciliation, but that's all it is. So unless and until we see something that has more concrete details and hear more chatter about it, other than on social media, I'm not particularly worried about PSLF, even for future loans, definitely not for existing loans. Other forgiveness programs, there's actually over 100 at the state level. Massachusetts has some, generally for people that work in healthcare, but every state, I believe, has at least one student loan forgiveness program. Some of them, like I said, most of them are related to healthcare. There's some for teachers, there's some for public defenders. There used to be, I don't know if it's still there, but there's an oddball one that you can get some student loan forgiveness just by moving to the state of Kansas. We have a database on our website that we update twice a year that have all the programs that we're aware of. There is some forgiveness for teachers that have federal student loans that work for what's called a Title I school, which tends to be low income, or a high percentage of students qualify for free school lunch, and that can forgive up to $17,500 of your loans. And then there's also discharge if something bad happens to you, if you should pass away, if you should become unable to work due to disability permanently, if the school that you attended committed fraud or closed before you were able to complete your degree, if you were the victim of identity theft and you didn't receive benefit from the loans, there's other reasons for discharge as well. I also don't think those discharges are going anywhere either. And then finally, private loans. Every private loan is different. They do tend to have fewer, if any, lower payment options or safety nets. Although some, specifically I've seen it with credit unions or state-based private loans, are able to offer some limited lower payment options or deferments in some cases. So if you have a private loan, and you are struggling financially, I do encourage you to contact the loan holder in particular to see and look at your promissory note to see what they might offer you. Ironically, and it's because of the regulator that does oversight for consumer debt as a whole, which includes private loans but doesn't include federal loans. In many cases, they're not allowed to offer you a lower payment option or any type of deferment until your loan's in default, which is very similar to how mortgages work. So if you are in default, at that point, they actually may be able to offer you, say, interest-only payments for a year or two. I've seen that fairly frequently. Most will offer 2 or 3 months of forbearance, even before you default. Sometimes they base that on your finances as well as if your co-signer's finances, and sometimes they do charge a fee to get on that forbearance. But again, every private loan is different. And sometimes even within a lender, they might have different private loan programs and those have different options. So the best thing you can do if you're struggling with your private loan is to contact the loan holder. Now, one of the few ways to lower the payments on a private loan is to refinance the loan. Especially if you have an interest rate higher than, say, 7 or 8%, it might be worth looking into refinancing at a lower interest rate and perhaps a longer term. That can lower the payment. Refinancing is also potentially a way to get your co-signer off the hook if you have one on your private loan. Also, some private loans have co-signer release programs where if you make a certain number of consecutive payments on time and or meet certain debt to income levels, they will release the co-signer without you having to refinance the loan. And with that, I think I hit it right on the nose. I reached time. I do have a couple minutes to answer some additional questions that might be out there.
Yeah, Betsy, we had a few questions about public service loan forgiveness. One person has been working in public service and paying monthly for 10 years. How do I get the public service loan forgiveness? What's the process?
If once you've submitted proof of your eligible employment for the 10 years, assuming that you've made the payments on eligible loans and you were making an eligible payment to begin with, once they've processed that proof of eligible employment for the 10 years, the forgiveness is automatic. So I suggest you go to studentaid.gov and look at the PSLF help tool, and that's the easiest way to submit your proof of income. Now, once they have certified your employment, and you're going to show this sort of green banner, and from there it takes around 90 days for the information to trickle down to your loan servicer and the loan to get zeroed out. Do not call your loan servicer and harass them to process your forgiveness. They have no control over that anymore. It's all centralized within the Department of Ed.
And then we had another question about public service loan forgiveness. Do nonprofit hospital employees qualify? I believe yes, correct?
They do, but there is a congressional proposal, which I think I mentioned. I don't know if I meant, you're my second presentation together today, and so I don't know if I mentioned it on this one or the other one. There is a proposal under reconciliation to remove the 501c3 status from all the hospitals. Listen, healthcare is a really strong lobbying. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But if it did, there would be some residual victims here, some unintended consequences, which would mean that future employment at a hospital, because it wasn't a 501c3, wouldn't count towards PSLF. But it wouldn't be retroactive, and I actually don't think it'll go anywhere.
Then we had a question, if a parent works for in the public interest for a nonprofit or government, does the child or student qualify? That's no, right?
No,
it's
and then I'm
only-
going to answer the same answer if you flip that question around. The most common way I get that question is, if my parent took out a Parent Plus loan on my behalf and I'm working a PSLF eligible job, can we get PSLF for the Parent Plus loan? And the answer is also no. All those programs, PSLF, the income-driven plans, regardless who's actually making the payment on the loan, the eligibility is always based on the actual borrower, and there are 0 ways to change who the borrower is within the federal student loan programs.
I get it. And then we had another question, which I think you answered, but just to reiterate, to get the public student loan forgiveness, did someone need to apply prior to starting payments?
No, and you don't really apply for PSLF. You submit your proof of eligible employment. Hopefully you're submitting proof of your eligible employment along the way, although you're technically not required to submit it at all until after you think you've hit the 10 years. That's just a really bad strategy, because if you're missing an eligibility component, if you've been submitting your proof of eligible employment along the way, you'll know along the way if you're missing an eligibility component. We recommend that you submit your proof of employment on an annual basis. But again, that's not required. You technically don't have to until after you've hit the 10 years.
And they're submitting it on studentaid.gov.
Via the PSLF help tool, right?
Yeah, okay. One final question that we have so far is it possible for someone to have too high of an income for public service loan forgiveness?
Yes. Anybody whose income is higher than how much they owe and they're just starting their PSLF journey, PSLF is probably not going to shake out for you. You're probably going to pay unless you have a Brady Bunch worth of kids. You're going to end up paying the loan off before you see forgiveness. And remember, the name of the game isn't forgiveness. The name of the game is paying the least amount over time. So if your income is high compared to what you owe, you're probably going to spend less money paying the loans off aggressively than you would if you pursued forgiveness.
Right, because otherwise you're paying all that interest. Yeah. Okay. I believe that is all the questions that we have so far. We are, again, everyone who joined us, we are going to be sending you the slides. So you'll have all this information in front of you. You will have a way to contact TISLA directly and ask advice by email, or to go through their very helpful tools on their website. You'll have the studentaid.gov information and the tools that were mentioned there. So I think that with that said, I think
One thing, sorry, PS about our website. If you're going there now, we are in the middle of a website refresh. So keep an eye out for that in the next couple weeks. Especially if you look at our website and go, 2018 called and they want their website back. I acknowledge that. So we're updating it. While you're there, I also encourage you to go to our staff page and meet meet the TISLA pets. I'm actually surprised Alice, the student loan cat, didn't join us on this webinar. So we've put them up there to hopefully reduce some anxiety around student loan debt, especially right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that, like, positive attitude that you have and the wealth and depth of the information that you're sharing, Betsy. I know that you're bringing all that expertise to everyone on this call, and we really appreciate it. With that, I think we're going to wrap up. You're through with your slide deck, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm sorry we went a little over time, but I think it was worth it to answer some of those questions. And you will get this information. And thank you, Betsy and Mel, for joining us on the call as well.
Thank you.
No problem.